Tonight on Reel to Reel, Father Tom Leger talks about God and the superego, and we'll take a look at efforts to combat starvation here in America with a visit to Second Harvest in New Orleans. And we'll examine the problem of starvation in Africa with a look at how Americans are contributing dollars for food relief. We'll see Cliff Robertson visiting relief camps in Ethiopia, and we'll take a look at the efforts of USA for Africa and the We Are the World video. Hello, I'm Isabel Garvey-LaGrosse. Welcome to Reel to Reel. Good evening. Father Dave is off tonight, but he'll be back next week. Up first tonight is Father Tom Leger to talk to us about that little voice we sometimes hear in our head, the one that tells us the difference between right and wrong. Some call it a conscience, others call it the superego. Whatever you call it, it's that voice that determines what you do and you don't do. And tonight, Father Tom will tell us about how misleading that inner voice can sometimes be.
Greetings in the Lord. There is a big difference between God and our superego. People, however, frequently confuse one with the other. The voice of superego has to do with that inner voice of oughts and shoulds that we have. It has to do with all of the bad boy and naughty girl tapes that sometimes go all the way back to our childhood. Sometimes people confuse their conscience with what in fact is their superego. Now, the superego has a temporary role to play in the development of children. After all, youngsters are not capable of making adult decisions. They need very clear guidelines for their own protection. But somewhere along the way in life, we need to learn to grow up. Now, we can never erase those old tapes that we have acquired when we were youngsters, but what we can do is get a different set of tapes, the message of Jesus Christ, and play those new tapes at a louder volume. The message of Jesus is a very clear one. It is that our God is a God of love and forgiveness and understanding and compassion. In prayer, however, we are sometimes beset by an inner voice that accuses and condemns and rejects. And at that time, we make the critical mistake of confusing God with the superego. If that's God, we don't want anything to do with that God. Who can blame us? Who needs that kind of accusatory voice that lays a critical guilt trip on us, that has nothing at all to contribute to us except a lot of oughts and shoulds? Well, how can you tell which is the true God of Jesus and which is the superego? Well, when the voice of God is speaking to us, we don't feel trapped. Rather, we are gently invited to grow. We are not browbeaten and made to feel unworthy. The feeling is one of being shown possibilities rather than being issued an ultimatum. Our old nemesis, the superego, on the other hand, is a relentless taskmaster. We feel like we have no choice open to us. We must, ought, should do such and such. There's no inner peace, and there's no feeling of freedom. What a pity that so many persons think that by rejecting their superego, they are rejecting God. Actually, such individuals might be a lot closer to the kingdom of heaven than they suspect.
If you would like a transcript of Father Leger's message, write to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, room 907, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 19103. A little later in tonight's show, we'll be taking a look at how some Americans are trying to provide relief for the starving peoples of Africa. But first, let's take a look at one effort to combat hunger right here at home.
20% of the food supply in this country is wasted and destroyed every year. That's 1/5 of the food supply in this country, and that's like 132 million tons of food valued at $32 billion. An incredible amount of food is wasted annually. If 1/2 of that food could have been recouped and salvaged and distributed to the needy, it would have been able to satisfy all those people who were living at or below the poverty level at that time.
Brother Ronald Specht is the director of the Second Harvest Program, a food bank sponsored by the Office of the Social Apostolate in the Archdiocese of New Orleans.
The Second Harvest Program is a food banking program that works to solicit donations from the food industry of food which is no longer marketable, sellable, but is still edible and nutritious. The food industry people donate this food to us, we warehouse it here, and then we in turn distribute this food to any charitable agency or organization which is nonprofit, tax exempt, and takes care of the needy, the ill, or children.
Members of the food industry, from growers, packagers, processors, and wholesalers, to food brokers and retail outlets, all donate food to help Second Harvest feed the hungry in southern Louisiana.
At present, we are distributing food to 92 different charitable agencies who, according to our statistics, provide over 10,000 meals daily for the needy, the ill, or children. And this ranges in anything from soup kitchens, homes for unwed mothers, daycare centers for children, adults, retarded individuals, alcoholic and drug rehabilitation programs, you name it.
Sergeant Major Norman Forey works with the Salvation Army in New Orleans and has been getting food from Second Harvest since it opened almost 2 years ago.
It's a real blessing to have the Second Harvest in New Orleans, because without it, we couldn't do as much as what we are now doing. The Second Harvest program has been a real blessing to us, and I feel it's an honor to be able to share in something like this, because we can actually do the Lord's work more by getting out with the people, because the food is available to distribute to them.
Each week, the participating agencies get a list of what foods are available at the Second Harvest warehouse. Their orders are taken over the phone early in the week, and then appointments are scheduled for each agency to come in on Wednesday or Thursday to pick up their food. Some agencies travel over 3 hours to pick up their donations. Agencies are asked to make a contribution of 10 cents per pound for the food, which is weighed out before they leave. This minimal charge covers the expenses incurred in running the huge warehouse.
I was asking one of the sisters one day when she was here, you know, what has the program meant to you? And she said, well, because of our budget cutbacks, we've also had to cut back on the number of children that we can take. But since we've been coming out here getting food from the Second Harvest program, we've been able to take 5 or 6 more students into the program. That made us feel good that we were really having an effect, not only in the fact of feeding the hungry, but helping to keep programs to maintain their level of clients and sometimes even to increase them. Our motto here is, the poor we will have always with us, but why the hungry? And that's a question I put to everyone.
No matter how serious the hunger problem in America is today, it pales in comparison with the starvation that currently exists in Africa. When Reel to Reel returns, we'll take a look at this critical situation, so stay with us. A few months ago, Catholic Relief Services in New York sent actor Cliff Robertson and a camera crew to Ethiopia for a first-hand look at the problems of starvation there. This is what they brought back.
What you're about to see is not entertainment. It's a graphic, some might say too graphic account of a tragedy for Africa and specifically Ethiopia. It's also a challenge to all of us, all over the world, to try and help alleviate to some degree this tragedy. I was asked to come here by the Catholic Relief Services to photograph and to take those pictures of what is happening back to America and see if America, in its characteristic, generous, humanitarian way, will respond. The last time I was involved in Africa in a situation like this was Biafra, and the response was overwhelmingly humanitarian. I hope it'll be the same this time. Some of you who see this film will feel that it is repugnant. We recognize that it is not easy to watch, but we ask you to recognize that this is the way it is, and therefore this is the way we're going to show it, in the hope that you, the American public, will open your hearts and respond as best you can. And we thank you.
Ethiopia is a country of 42 million people. 7 million are starving. There have been some 300,000 deaths during this drought. Increased supplies of grain, wheat, and other foodstuffs are arriving in the famine-stricken regions of Ethiopia. Much of it due to the generosity of Americans who have contributed more than $8 million in just 1 month to Catholic Relief Services, one of the international agencies working in the area. Ethiopians and representatives of food donor nations are working together to help feed some of the 6 to 10 million who are starving. In November, 4,500 tons of food were brought into the worst afflicted regions in the north by a consortium of international organizations. This film, supplied by Catholic Relief Services, shows a slight improvement in the health of some children and adults, and perhaps even a little hope in this desperate emergency. But the hope may be short-lived. For many, the food has come too late. Every day, families bury their dead, mostly the elderly and infants too weak to fight the effects of prolonged and grave malnutrition. Relief officials now estimate that December will be the worst month yet, with a 10,000-ton shortfall of food predicted by the end of the year. Catholic Relief Service is trying to meet part of the need by diverting food from some of its other overseas programs. Throughout 1985, an additional 1.2 million tons of food will be needed to get Ethiopia back on its feet again. But here and now, the future continues to look grim. Water shortages are crippling efforts to feed the starving millions, and outbreaks of infectious disease such as typhus and measles have stricken thousands in the overcrowded feeding camps where Ethiopians are flocking for food and medical attention. Medical supplies and vaccines have been brought in, and many of the sick are receiving attention from healthcare personnel, but much more needs to be done. The crisis is a long-term one, the result of the worst drought in Africa's modern history. Ethiopia is the hardest hit, but starvation is ravaging the peoples of Chad, Somalia, Mali, Kenya, Mozambique, and at least 20 other African countries. It is a tragedy of such magnitude that many observers have called it the worst human disaster of our time. New commitments for food aid from the U.S. have been secured for next year. But for a single dying Ethiopian child today, the only answer is food. Enough of it, soon enough.
Of the 30 countries affected, Ethiopia is clearly feeling the worst. Over 70% of the African continent is right now suffering from the worst drought in its history. According to various relief agencies operating in Africa, an overall total of 30 million people are facing extinction by starvation. On this map, the countries in black represent the hardest hit by drought, and the growing numbers of death by starvation is staggering. Ethiopia, over 400,000 people dead. Mozambique, 200,000. Chad, 200,000. Senegal, 50,000 people dead. And as families and tribes move from territory to territory, country to country in search of food, the numbers of lives threatened becomes astronomical. Ethiopia, 6 million people facing starvation. Mozambique, 4 million. Mali, 2.5 million. Sudan, 1 million people facing starvation. But getting food to the famine-ravaged countries is only half the problem. Transportation of grain to the refugee camps is difficult, expensive, and often dangerous, since many of the African countries are involved in civil wars. Disease is also hampering the relief effort. At a typical relief station distributing food, the population can swell from 2,000 people to 25,000 in a few days. And once the supplies run dry, refugees stay, too weak to travel further. And with the throngs of people come a variety of deadly infectious diseases: influenza, measles, tuberculosis, smallpox, typhus, and cholera. All this, and too little medicine, supplies, and medical personnel to care for the dying masses. It is estimated that over 200 people a day are dying in Ethiopia alone. Even when the refugees do receive food, it's only enough to keep them alive. Most adults receive a 400-calorie feeding twice a day. That's 800 calories. Most of us are used to eating that much in one sitting alone. So how do you and I help? With contributions. It doesn't have to be large, whatever you can afford to give. Or if you can't contribute money, contribute time to raise funds. Get involved in a project like the students from the Overbrook School for the Blind in Overbrook recently did. They held a wake-a-thon, getting people to sponsor them for every hour they could stay awake in a 24-hour period. The final result? These teens raised over $3,600 for the starving people of Ethiopia, which they proudly turned over to Catholic Relief Services. Father William Paul, Director of Catholic Relief Services in Philadelphia, accepted the check.
Catholic Relief Services has been in Ethiopia for about 10 years. We're involved not only in Ethiopia, however, we're involved in about 23 other countries of Africa. The food is being provided by various development agencies throughout the world. For instance, a lot of food is coming from our own government. The Agency for International Development has donated tons of food. We're also receiving food from Canada, also from the European Economic Community. The food is there, it's getting there. The problem is the distribution of the food to get it to the mouths of the people, and that's where the donations come in. Ethiopia is basically a very, very rugged country. It's very difficult to distribute the food, therefore. So we need special jeeps, helicopters, and so forth, machinery to unload the ships and to get the food out to the people in the various camps. Here in Philadelphia, we have raised approximately $1.1 million to aid the starving in Ethiopia.
And Philadelphia leads the nationwide efforts of Catholic Relief Services to raise money with $1.1 million in donations. Other major contributing cities include New York City with $600,000, Chicago with $225,000, and Los Angeles with $90,000. Contributions from Catholic Relief Services across the country total almost $40 million. But Catholic Relief Services is only one of over 40 different nonprofit relief agencies providing help to starving Africa. CARE has raised a total of over $12 million. Save the Children has raised over $5.5 million. And Lutheran World Relief has raised over $2.6 million. One of the more publicized relief agencies is USA for Africa. USA for Africa stands for United Support of Artists for Africa and represents 45 of America's most popular music artists banding together to raise money for the starving continent. On January 28, 1985, names like Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, Kenny Rogers, Bob Dylan, Bette Midler, Bruce Springsteen, Cyndi Lauper, and Willie Nelson joined forces in Los Angeles to record the song "We Are the World." The resulting single, album, and video are on their way to making music industry history. The artists receive no money for their performance. Instead, money raised will go into a relief fund to provide short-term and long-term assistance for Africa. 75% of the single or album's price will go directly into the relief fund. Since the album sells for $10, $7.50 from each purchase will go directly to fighting hunger in Africa.
The sales have been great. Ever since it first came in, it's been selling out constantly. It's due to its mass appeal to all different age groups. There's no problem at all with the price because they know it's going for a really, really good cause.
Since its release, the single "We Are the World" has raised over $9 million. The album has raised over $22 million. And when you include other merchandising, such as books, posters, and T-shirts, and even a documentary on the event, USA for Africa has raised over $40 million for the African relief effort.
There comes a time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people dying. Oh, when it's time to lend a hand to life, the greatest gift of all. We can't go on pretending day by day that someone somewhere will soon make a change. We all a part of God's great big family. And the truth, you know, love is all we need. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones who make a brighter day. So let's start giving. There's a choice we're making. We're saving our own lives. It's true, we make a better day, just you and me. Well, send them your heart, so they know that someone cares, and their lives will be stronger and free, as God has shown us by turning stone to bread. And so we all must lend a helping hand. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones to make a brighter day. So let's start giving. Oh, there's a choice we're making. We're saving our lives. It's true, we make a better day, just you and me. When you're down and out, there seems no hope at all. But if you just believe, there's nowhere we can fall. Well, let's realize, oh, that a change can only come when we stand together as one. We are the children. We are the ones who make a brighter day. So let's start giving. There's a choice we're making. We're saving our own lives. To make a better day, just you and me. We are the world.
There are no short-term answers to the problems of Ethiopia and Africa. The lives of 30 million people hang in the balance. Even after the millions that have already been collected are utilized, billions more will be needed to help Africa become self-sufficient again. And it's up to you and to me to provide the contributions. If you would like to make a contribution, here are some addresses to which you may send your tax-deductible donation. In Philadelphia, send to Catholic Relief Services, care of Father William Paul, 1719 Morris Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 19145. For CARE, write to CARE, World Headquarters, 660 First Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. For Save the Children, send to Save the Children African Emergency Fund, P.O. Box 925, Westport, Connecticut, 06881. And remember, the easiest way of all to contribute is to buy the We Are the World album. However you do it, please contribute. It is literally a matter of life and death. And join us next week when Reel to Reel brings you another special edition of Crosstalk. Thanks for being with us. Good night.
There's a
Charity in action is a heartwarming sight. In South Jersey, the House of Charity relieves hardship for thousands of men, women, and children. Through its agencies, retarded children receive special education. Medical treatment goes to the poor. Concerned workers care for the elderly. Young people are counseled on drug and alcohol abuse. And the physically handicapped receive training. Support the House of Charity in South Jersey and touch someone's life with love.